bread ration was 125 grams. If you have never held 125 grams of bread, do that now, not a slice. A slice assumes a loaf. This was a measured block, roughly the size of a deck of cards. And that was the day. Not breakfast, not lunch. The day. September 8, 1941. The Germans closed the encirclement around Leningrad. Within 72 hours, a 19-year-old named Lena Mukhina wrote in her diary that she had eaten her daily ration by 9 in the morning because she had not yet understood that it was the entire day. That single entry tells you everything about the gap between knowing a thing and having restructured your life around it. The siege lasted 872 days. Most people who study that number study the horror. What I study is the 90-day line, because something specific and documentable happened there. The people who died earliest were not the weakest. They were the ones who treated the first phase as temporary. They burned through reserves assuming relief was coming. They ate at pre-siege caloric levels for as long as they physically could, and then they had nothing left to recalibrate with. Liza Razumova's diary entries from November 1941 read like a ledger of that mistake in slow motion. Not her mistake, the people around her. She had already made the shift by then. She had stopped waiting. The people who survived past day 90 had done one thing differently, and it was not about supplies. It was about timeline. They had stopped treating the siege as an emergency and started treating it as the operating environment. That sounds simple. It is not simple. It requires you to look at the situation clearly while you still have the margin to adapt before the body starts making decisions for you. Now, the math, because the math is where this stops being history and starts being logistics. 125 grams of bread produces roughly 280 calories. A human body in cold conditions, and Leningrad winters run well below freezing, requires between 2,500 and 3,000 calories per day to maintain basic organ function. That is not comfort. That is organ maintenance. The deficit per day at ration level was approximately 2,200 calories. Over 90 days, that is a cumulative deficit of roughly 198,000 calories. The body responds to that deficit in sequence. First fat reserves, then muscle mass, then organ tissue. By day 60, people who had not found supplemental caloric sources were exhibiting the early stages of dystrophy. By day 90, those who had not recalibrated were not recalibrating. They were past the point where recalibration was physically available to them. The Ladoga Ice Road opened in November 1941, approximately 70 days into the siege. It crossed 30 kilometers of frozen lake under German artillery fire. Trucks carried supplies in and evacuees out. The caloric math on that road is its own study. Trucks frequently broke through the ice, drivers died, and the resupply volume in the first weeks was a fraction of what the city needed. The road did not end the siege. It slowed the attrition. The people who survived long enough to benefit from it were the ones who had already made the internal shift before it opened. 3 documented failure modes account for the majority of early deaths. First, treating the first 30 days as a temporary inconvenience and spending reserves emotionally rather than strategically. Eating to comfort rather than to sustain. Second, social miscalibration in both directions. Either hoarding in isolation and losing the community intelligence networks that told you where supplemental food sources were appearing, or sharing indiscriminately and depleting faster than the group could sustain. Both paths ended the same way. Third, failing to acquire skills during the early window. The first 30 days, there was still enough margin to learn things you had never done before. Most people spent those days waiting for the situation to resolve, rather than learning to do anything useful inside it. Not failures of courage, failures of timeline recalibration. The distinction matters because courage is not the variable. Sarajevo, 1992 through 1995, 1,425 days. Different war, different city, identical pattern. The people who structured their lives around the siege as a permanent operating condition early, who learned to grow food in apartment stairwells, who established trade networks with genuine exchange value, who identified a durable and useful skill set within the first 60 days, were categorically more likely to survive than those with larger initial reserves who continued to operate as though normal supply chains were about to resume. The Siege of Sarajevo is not a footnote to Leningrad. It is a confirmation. This is a repeating pattern, not a unique catastrophe. Here is the only practical exercise that matters from all of this. Not a gear list, a timeline audit. Right now, today, count the actual days of caloric sufficiency in your household, not what is in the pantry in general terms. Actual calories divided by actual daily requirement for every person in your household. Write the number down. Then ask one question. If the resupply window closed tomorrow and remained closed for 90 days, what is the first skill you do not currently have that you would need? The answer to that question is the only preparation worth doing in the first phase, not the second or third answer. The first one. Leningrad survivors, had they known what was coming in the 30 days before the encirclement closed, would not have told you to stockpile more. They would have told you to learn something durable before the margin disappeared. The Wehrmacht had been moving toward Leningrad for months before September 8, 1941. The encirclement was not a surprise in any meaningful intelligence sense. People saw it approaching and continued to behave as though the institutional response would be adequate, as though the supply chain would hold, as though someone with more authority and more information was managing the situation. Some of them were still waiting when the bread ration dropped to 125 grams and the winter set in. I have looked at this pattern in Leningrad, in Sarajevo, in New Orleans in 2005, in Caracas across the 2010s. The window is always there, 30 days, sometimes 60, when recalibration is still possible and most people spend it waiting. The ledger closes the same way every time.
Welcome to the wasteland, darling, where the jukebox never dies. Just a little music for the journey underneath these endless skies.